Welcome. So, Nuclear War Simulator Rob O'Neill Edition. So to start with, Rob O'Neill is not a part of this video. He's not part of making it. He is not going to be on it. Is the headline a little misleading? No, it is completely misleading. But Rob O'Neill seems like a pretty funny guy, and I'd love to have a video with him, part of it. And so, if he'd like to do a video with a very modest, to say the least, YouTube channel, be awesome. I'd like to do a stream, drink a beer or something, maybe a glass of scotch. But what this is this is going to explore, instead of sending Rob O'Neill and his fellow members of DevGru, Red Squadron, to the Bin Laden compound in Abbottabad. This would be what would happen instead if we did a tactical nuclear strike, a low-yield tactical nuclear strike instead. There's almost zero chance we would have utilized this option. We did consider the possibility of, guided missile strikes. I think one of the things was, how could we ensure that A, it was bin Laden, and B, that he was actually dead? It was considered much less risk than sending, special ops in, which ran the risk of a nominally ally country sending us and not including them into the conversation, allegedly. That ran a lot of risk. And so, whatever your opinion of, I was going to say, call him Osama bin Laden, Barack Obama, whatever your opinion of his was, it obviously took a certain level to authorize this mission, knowing what was going to happen. So this is going to look at, though, what if we chose another route? What if we chose to do a low-yield strike at his compound, which would almost say we validated to almost certainty that it was bin Laden, and we wanted to be ensured that he was definitely going to be dead. What would the casualty fallout look like? So what I chose was the B-61 version 12. It's a gravity bomb. It's nominally 50 kiloton as a standard setting here. I changed that yield, and I changed that yield because there's some level of uncertainty, but these bombs have the dial-a-yield capability, so they can be a range of warhead yield size, and it's believed that the smallest yield size is 0.3 kiloton. So I'm going with the smallest size, should still be significantly stronger than the largest conventional bombs. Just as a comparison, what would that be, roughly 300 tons? And the Moab, mother of all bombs, for comparison, is about 10 tons yield size. So that tells you right there, you're looking at 30 times the strength of a Moab, and this is the smallest, by far, of the current nuclear arsenal for the United States. So I'm going to center it right over his compound, surface burst, to minimize the fallout to nearby people. When I mean fallout, I don't mean the actual fallout as in a nuclear sense. I mean casualties. So airburst would actually minimize fallout a little bit more, but this is actually trying to minimize the resulting nearby area. So let's go ahead and hit it and quit it. So if you haven't had a chance, I would read Rob O'Neill's book or get the audiobook. I have the audiobook. And look, your opinion of the war on terror, your opinion on, depending on how deep you get into it, the Navy SEAL community, all that stuff aside, he's an entertaining storyteller. And I don't mean that to knock like his story is untrue, but I mean as just, he's an entertaining storyteller. He narrates his own book, and like I said, it's pretty funny. So at times, I know there's been a lot of say hoopla about, whether or not he's the one that killed bin Laden and different aspects of the story. I said, not my community, not a part of it, not my story to tell or to debunk or whatever. That's his story, that's his community story. So I just speak to the fact that he's quite entertaining to listen to. So Pakistan, this would have potentially, again, it's a simulation. People want to judge on realism. This isn't a matter of realism. This is a matter of simulating potential outcomes. In this simulator, they predict the potential outcome would be roughly 27,000 casualties. Obviously a significant number. It would be larger than the casualties in the global war on terror for the United States side. Clearly not civilian casualties or necessarily enemy casualties combined, but I mean on the United States side. And just under roughly half the casualties that happened in Vietnam for the United States side, considering that stretched over a multi-year period. So, one bomb, smallest one, a significant amount of loss to happen. So, a very telling reason that it would be very effective if we were certain he was in that location. You drop this on, he's dead. You landed on him, no doubt about it. But the question's really going to remain, well, how is it worth what other losses there are? And I'm sure there's some blowhard people who would be like, yeah, bin Laden did this. But reality is that there's a lot of people that are going to be there, that nearby area, that have absolutely nothing to do with the situation. There's always going to be a level of fallout in these things. Whether it's, any type of bombing type of situation, there would have been potential non-combatant casualties. Not to mention, he had wives, believe children, not believe, but there were children, wives, other people in that building. So that's something I always had to keep in mind when a strike is made like this. So one thing I'm going to do a little different. I'm going to place two individuals, just to show with an utmost certainty, but kind of let's go one. Let's consider him, since this is a pretty significant structure. Let's go. Multi-reinforced, so you say brick, whatever, but I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt. So, let's go. One more. Let's put him on the third story. So it was a 3-story building. Do the same thing. Center it. Interesting. So this time it puts it at the lower end of the 26,000, still, within a certain variance. And so the gentleman on the first floor, they have injured, serious radiation sickness, fatigue, blood vomiting, and diarrhea. Death from infections and hemorrhages likely within 2 to 4 weeks. So chances are the building would have collapsed in this circumstance. I take some of that with a grain of salt, provided it had stayed up with this amount of loss nearby. Unless the government authorities really prioritized this person, they would have been dead. So let's go to the next one. So he was on the 3rd story, and that's where bin Laden was. In the compound when the SEALs entered. Mild radiation sickness, nausea and fatigue, long-term reduction in the number of white blood cells, low chance of death from infections within 6 to 8 weeks. but crushed by a collapsed building. And so they have that as a dead. I would say in all realism, both of these would be casualties. So that would have been, they would have died. Just, even at a lower yield like that, dropped right on top of it. No doubt about it. So why the gravity bomb? Why not the standoff air-launched cruise missile? Why not other things? Well, anything launched land-based, especially from the United States, would increase the risk of an escalation with non-involved parties. The gravity bomb is not going to be intercepted. It has the ability to be delivered by one of the stealth, either fighters or... Well, I don't think the F-35A is capable yet, but it's going to be. I'd have to check that one. But there would be a capability for the B-2 stealth bomber to ingress in and drop. I'd say there's probably a high likelihood that you had some stealth assets in the air when the SEALs were on the ground. Because, and this was something relayed in Rob's book, was that it was presented that if the Pakistani army was able to respond in time, that the SEALs would potentially offer themselves to surrender, and then we would negotiate their release. And he kind of Obama nodded his head and basically then asked the Air Force, what would we need to, spank them pretty hard, because we weren't going to let our boys surrender. And so if it's true, obviously that's, and you can certainly argue politics behind that. If our guys were surrendered and stuff, it might not look good, but either way, you got to appreciate a response like that. Chance already had stuff in the air, probably in case something was needed. And I've heard some argued that some Pakistani officials were alerted. And again, that's a whole different route. So, outside my scope of knowledge. Now, there is something to be said here. Pakistan is a nuclear armed country. We just, in this scenario, dropped a nuke on them. So even a low yield nuke is a nuke. We just killed a ton of their citizens. There's different possibilities from that point forward. Do they make some show type of strike to try to save face? Or do they potentially hit back at some locations where we have bases in the area with some lower yield nukes themselves? What if it's a risk that we're not willing to take? So what if we wanted to say, not just drop a bomb there, but we want to neutralize their locations? Basically, let's say a nuclear decapitation strike. What would happen and what would that look like? So that's going to... And again, we're going to look at utilizing the same weapon system. Again, they could do sub-launch, they could do different options at this point, but let's say we want to utilize our stealth assets, minimize external casualties, but also maximize the destruction of their capabilities to hit us back in any way. If it wasn't for a little thing called fallout and what could potentially be a mass of refugees trying to stream across their border, India might not be that upset with us. Now, look, jokes aside, I'll give the Indians a benefit of the doubt that... Oh, didn't zoom in enough. They got two for one deal. Give the Indians benefit of the doubt that unless there was a very good reason, they wouldn't want their neighbors to be nuked. If you're Indian and you're watching this and you really wouldn't mind them getting nuked, hey, leave me a comment. Let me know. Something very cathartic about this when you're just looking at a screen and you're just doing this. Question would be raised too. This isn't a matter of national survival. If you were a pilot, fighter pilot, and you know the destructive capability you're carrying, and you know what you're going to be doing, would you do it? Certainly, our members of the, prior to the Air Force, Army Air Force, they did. Now, whether or not they knew exactly what the destructive force they were carrying was, but they did, and they found out pretty fast. But that was, I'm going to say, a different set of circumstances. Okay. So, surprisingly, I left 3 open. 4. Don't want to leave them, so. Oops. I know that I've kind of missed a couple of these, but then again, if we weren't certain of their destruction, we may be dropping a second or third. But also, they're very remote locations, so it's not really going to change the casualties very much. This one's different. This is close to a city, so I want to make sure I'm not. All right. Did not increase the casualties by very much at all, if at all. So, one thing to have a benefit of distribution of nuclear forces into very remote mountainous areas, it's going to mitigate a lot of impact. So, the initial strike was in a city, so that would have had a much larger casualty yield. So there's something to be said for the distribution of your nuclear forces. We saw it in a previous video, the live stream I did, where the Chinese attempted to take out our ICBMs. And because those are always considered nuclear sponges because they'd be targeted by the enemies and put the citizens at risk. But the amount of loss of life with high megaton yield weapons was 60 of them total, 60 warheads, was a fraction of the loss with one warhead in Manhattan. So, doesn't probably mean a lot, though, if you're in the prairie lands where they're dropping, though, if you're one of the fraction of a loss. So, again, that's a completely far out scenario. But prior to that, the idea of sending SEALs into Pakistan may have seemed far out, not something that we would have risked. We traditionally hadn't risked. We traditionally went the Tomahawk missile or Hellfire missile strikes or numerous other options. We obviously utilized them heavily in Iraq and Afghanistan, among other places, but not necessarily in an allied nation like that. It was obviously hugely effective for what it was needed. They eliminated the target and they minimized any civilian casualties. Troops all got out. Unlike what some kind of idiotic conspiracy theorists said too, the guys who did the raid were not killed on the Extortion 17 chopper shoot down. There's people out there who still believe the guys that did the raid against Osama bin Laden got killed because the government wanted to hide the fact that Osama bin Laden had, still alive or something. Everybody in the raid is still alive. That's according to Rob O'Neill, Nizro. So, if anybody would know that would talk, I'm sure he's the one. 2 different squadrons. So, it was Red Squadron who did the raid on bin Laden, and Extortion 17 was Gold Squadron, I believe. And it was one troop, from what I understand, of Gold Squadron. So I think each squadron had 4 troops, but again, that could be changed and vary. But the idea, I think people don't understand, is like SEAL Team 6, quote-unquote, DevGru. They're not necessarily a small body of individuals. Each squadron, I think, has, 50 assaulters? Or roughly, and then again, that changes. So, 17 people were killed on that. None of those were a part of the bin Laden raid. So, anyways, if you know Rob O'Neill, reach out to him. Tell him, love to do a live stream, drink a beer, blow some stuff up on Nuclear War Simulator, get his take on what he thinks about nukes and their viability, if any, in any type of conflict. And that's about it. Thanks, everybody.